I'll never forget how it felt to interpret that dream. He was so excited. He grabbed me and hugged me. For a moment, I completely forgot about everything I was going through. I was able to use the gift God has given me to help someone else. And part of me thinks that maybe this is the moment. The moment when my dreams get realized. All he has to do is tell Pharaoh about me. Just mention me one time. I hope he remembers me. I asked him to remember me.
All through this epic story of Joseph from the book of Genesis, Joseph has been teaching us how to deal with a rejected dream, how to deal with unjust leadership, how to deal with temptation, and now, in this episode, how to deal with a dead dream. What do you do when you feel all hope is lost? What do you do when your dream is in your grasp, only to see it pulled out from under you? After being sold as a slave by his own brothers, but then being given a ton of influence and leadership in his master's house, it seems like the dreams he has had long ago in his native land of Canaan might actually happen. Could it be that these dreams of wheat and stars and moon and sun all bowing down to him might actually happen? And would it be his brothers and parents who bowed? He's in charge of everything this captain owned, and God is blessing everything his hand touches. It's a great season. But then Potiphar's wife, she wants Joseph so bad, and she can't have him. So she accuses him of rape. And here we are, in prison, dejected, alone, falsely accused. Is God done with him? Not even close.
Joseph finds himself in jail, back in a captivity where he has no control. But the warden of the jail finds favor with young Joseph, and even though he most likely isn't a person who worships God, he sees Joseph. Like, he really sees him, and he recognizes that God is in him and doing great things through him. So amazingly, Joseph, for the second time now, gets promoted to being in charge. Now, as a prisoner, he's in charge of the prison, and the prison becomes more successful, and the warden doesn't have to do a whole lot with his job because God is working through Joseph and everything is under control. It's a good day to be a warden. Now, sometime later, the prison is greeted with two new prisoners. They work directly for Pharaoh, the leader of all of Egypt. The first guy is a baker who made bread for Pharaoh. The second guy is a wine taster who, well, you probably know what a wine taster does. The name says it all. Well, they'd been in prison a long time with Joseph attending them when they wake up one morning distraught and confused. Joseph is like, "What's wrong with you guys?" And they say, we both had weird dreams last night, and there's nobody here to interpret what they mean. Well, Joseph, who knows a little something about dreams, looks at them and says, "Doesn't God interpret all dreams? Tell those dreams to me." So the wine taster starts in on this dream about vines and grapes and squeezing the grapes into cups, and God gives Joseph the interpretation, and Joseph says, "There's good news for you. In 3 days, you'll be restored to your job with Pharaoh." Well, the wine taster is obviously pretty excited, so Joseph speaks to him, and he's like, "Look, when you get out of here and you get back with Pharaoh, please tell him about me. Like, tell him I was falsely accused and I don't deserve to be in this dungeon." Joseph pleads with him, "Please, please remember me." And then the baker speaks up next. "Well, here's my dream." And then he goes into this dream about some loaves of bread and a basket on his head and birds eating the bread. And then he waits for a favorable interpretation, but Joseph doesn't have one this time. "Here's what the dream means," he says. "In 3 days, you're going to be killed." He actually is way more specific than that. And Joseph says, "In 3 days, your body will be impaled on a pole and birds are going to eat your dead body." Well, sure enough, in 3 days, Pharaoh has a birthday party. And to celebrate, he brings up the baker and the wine taster from prison. The wine taster he restores to his job, but the baker is killed, all just as Joseph had said. From deep in this prison, Joseph waits for word from the wine taster that he's told Pharaoh his story, and he hopes that soon he will be released.
I asked him to remember me. I did what he asked. God did what he asked, and he lived. Now he's back in the job he has always loved. I asked him to remember me, but the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into years, and I'm still here, just waiting. It's like I never even existed.
Have you ever felt just completely lost? Nothing's going right and you don't know where to turn next? There's one glimmer of hope, one Hail Mary, if you will, only to see it taken away. That's where we find Joseph at this point in his story. Joseph has gone from favorite son to slave to now prisoner. And he's in prison in ancient Egypt, so there's no right to a speedy or fair trial. At this point, his only hope is to find favor with the Pharaoh's cupbearer in the hope that he will put in a good word for him. But now, even that hope is gone. So how did Joseph deal with his loss of hope? And how can we? Well, first, get your eyes off yourself. Joseph had compassion on others who also had dead dreams. The baker and wine taster were in the same prison awaiting a similar fate when Joseph chose to step into their lives. In Genesis 40, verse 7, Joseph noticed they were looking pretty down, and he said, "Why do you look so sad today?" It's really tempting during difficult seasons of our lives to put all of our attention on ourselves, our problems, our issues, our bad luck. But all that does is prolong and deepen our grief. While he was in prison and realizing the reality that his dream might never come true, Joseph took his eyes off of himself and put them on other people in need. And this is a crucial thing for us to do when we feel like some part of our life dreams might be dead. Second, not only did Joseph take his eyes off himself, he also used his gifts to help others, even when he couldn't help himself. He interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's servants and only asked that one that survived remember him in return. What does that mean for us? What are you pretty good at doing? Listening, cooking, baking, counseling, building things, hanging out, maybe just talking. Whatever it might be, use your gift to serve others. In our dark days, when we get our eyes off of ourselves and instead look around to others' needs, it is important that we actually do something to help them, even when we can't help ourselves. Solitude doesn't fix depression or anxiety or anger or bitterness, or a life that is not what we dreamed. But seeing other people's needs and serving them, that's what can help us deal, just like it did Joseph. The last thing we learn from Joseph while he was in prison with a dead dream is that he remembered God and pointed people to him. In verse 8, when the baker and wine taster were freaked out over their dreams and their inability to interpret them, Joseph pointed them to God when he asked them, "Are not all dreams from God?" You see, no matter how low things looked for Joseph, he made it a point to keep his focus on God and to keep other people's focus on God. He had his eyes off himself, used his gift to serve these two guys, and then he remembered to point them to God. We all have people around us who need a helping hand. They're having a bad day like you might be having. They have life dreams that are simply not coming true. And we can either put our focus only on ourselves and our problems, or we can focus on others and then get them to focus on the only one who can help them, God. As the story goes, the cupbearer gets his life back, but forgets to mention Joseph to the Pharaoh. Years go by, and you might feel like this too. Maybe there is something you're waiting for or a dream that is taking forever to come true. But here's the thing. Not very many good things happen fast. In the Bible, we see many instances where dreams don't get fulfilled overnight. For example, it took 25 years from Abraham hearing about a son to actually have one. The Israelites escaped Egypt over 400 years after this story we are studying took place. And then they waited in the desert another 40 years before they could enter the land they had been promised. And King David was anointed king 15 years before he actually took the throne. There are hundreds of years between the promise of the Messiah and his ultimate arrival. And it's been over 2,000 years since we received the promise that Jesus will return. And we're still waiting. But I want to remind you, we are never alone. During these times of waiting, we can rely on God for comfort. In Isaiah, God says this, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." We live in a fast-paced, satisfy me now world. We want what we want, and we want it now. But God has different timing. The dream you have may not even be realized in your lifetime. It might be that it takes multiple generations and you're a link in the chain to your grandchild's success. Sometimes dreams take time, and sometimes our hopes are fulfilled when we least expect it. Instead of focusing on our current situation, we need to continue to look for ways to serve God, serve others, and keep the faith that He has a plan. Let's continue with Joseph's story and see what happens next.
2 more years pass. The dream interpretations of the baker and the wine taster are a distant memory by now. It's almost like they didn't happen at all. And then one day, word starts to travel through Egypt, even reaching the prison, that the leader of Egypt himself, the great Pharaoh, was stricken by 2 dreams, and he didn't know what they meant. He demands that his magicians and wise men answer the dream, but they can't do it. And all of a sudden, 2 full years later, a light goes off in the wine taster's head, and he says, "Oh, Pharaoh, I just remembered something I was supposed to tell you. Remember back when you threw me in jail, and there was this Hebrew slave in there, and he interpreted my dream, and he interpreted the dead baker's dream too. And his interpretations were both spot on." Immediately, Joseph is called up to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, "Do you interpret dreams?" And Joseph says, predictably, "God does. He can help you." So Pharaoh tells Joseph the 2 dreams. In one of them, 7 skinny cows come and eat 7 fat ones. And in the other dream, 7 thin, dying stalks of grain eat 7 healthy fat ones. Joseph answers swiftly, "Pharaoh, God is telling you the same thing in each dream. There are going to be 7 years of huge crops followed by 7 years of famine. If you're smart, you'll start storing up grain because it's going to be really, really bad for 7 years. The famine will be so severe that nobody will even remember the days of plenty." Well, Joseph goes on to give some wise guidance to Pharaoh, and he says, "You should find an intelligent and wise man and put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. And then appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 20% of all the crops during the 7 good years. Put the crops in storehouses and guard it. That way there will be plenty of food for the 7 famine years." Well, Pharaoh is blown away by Joseph. And not only his interpretation, but also the wisdom he was giving as to what to do next. So Pharaoh says to Joseph, "You are obviously filled with the Spirit of God. He's given you the meaning of these dreams, so you'll be in charge. The only person in all of Egypt that's going to be higher than you is me. You're second in command. You're in charge of everything and everybody." And Pharaoh, he takes off his ring and he puts it on Joseph's finger, and he puts on a royal robe on him, and he puts a gold chain around his neck and sends Joseph around Egypt on a chariot. And get this, remember Joseph's dreams from the very beginning of the story, the ones where the wheat and stars all bow down to him? Well, wherever Joseph goes from here on out, all around Egypt, the command is shouted, "Kneel down," and everybody around is made to bow before Joseph. Those dreams he had are finally coming true. Man, things move quickly from here. Joseph is given a new Egyptian name, a wife with whom he has 2 sons, and he begins this inspection of the whole land of Egypt. He's 33 years old here. And sure enough, there's 7 years of plenty, and Joseph stockpiles an amazing amount of grain. But then famine comes, and the famine spreads beyond Egypt and his homeland of Canaan to his brothers and his fathers and his birds. They assume Joseph dead, but soon they make a trip to Egypt to buy grain that will change the course of history.